Welcome to the Republican Professor. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Phil Little. Thanks for being here, Phil.
It's great to be here with you.
Phil, it's been a long time since I've seen you.
And my daughter Nicolette said to tell you hello, and she was the reason that we're connected. And she had said that it reminded me that Dad, that was the only class I made sure I showed up on every day, every time. The others were so leftist and out there that she got in arguments with them. So sometimes she just wouldn't even go. But she was so impressed and learned so much from your class. And so thank you so much. We need more of that in our schools today.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I don't remember very many students from Pierce College 2009, which is the first year I taught there. Um, but I do remember your daughter, and I think did she ever go by Nikki by chance?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep, she was
okay.
Nikki.
That's how she introduced herself to me, and I think she would write her name different ways on quizzes and stuff like that. But my impressions of her were that she was one of the younger students at Pierce College in Woodland Hills, but she seemed to have her stuff together more than most students. And by that I mean she seemed to have a sense of who she was and where she was going. And I always thought of her as a good student, like a disciplined
Yeah.
student. She was one of my favorites there. So,
Yeah.
and
Well,
then,
she has done exceptional in her career in the world now. What she's
oh, good.
doing is exciting. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That's wonderful to hear. Uh, I had you come speak to my Pepperdine University course that I developed for the business department and business ethics, and that was a joy. You were one of the popular speakers there. So,
Well, I read finally read all your bio and all your credentials. And I think if I'd have known them then, I'd have probably been so intimidated. I don't know where I would come or not, but very impressive background.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. Uh, at that time, you gave me a book, Hostile Intent, and I flipped through it, and I never really started reading it until recently. I went through a move and I was going through some old books, and it was one of those books that I had on my bookshelf for a long time, and like so many books, you just get used to seeing it there. And well, through the move, I was like, wait, I never read this thing all the way through. I read parts of it. So I actually sat down, Phil, about a month ago and I started reading it. And I was so pleasantly surprised by it. I mean, it was it's a great read. It's called Hostile
Thank you.
Intent by Phil
Thank you.
Little, Broadman and Holdman Publishers. And um, I think one of the reasons I was able to enjoy it is just because I've had an interest in this topic for a long time. I uh and you approach it from an explicitly biblical worldview, and I
Mhm.
appreciated that part of it. And you also narrate parts of Los Angeles, and I know parts of Los Angeles very well because as a professor, I was always running around between Pepperdine and Loyola Marymount and Pierce. And
Right.
so you're talking about the San Fernando Valley. And at one point, you talk about following a suspect
Right.
down the 405, and she gets off on the 90. And I was like, oh, I know exactly, and you talk about Marina Del Rey, and she gets on Mindanao and then goes on Admiralty
Yeah.
Way. And I know exactly that whole area because that was the
Yeah.
shortcut I used from Loyola Marymount to Pepperdine. I would, uh,
Right.
I would bypass, Lincoln going north, and I would, do Washington, and then I would do Venice, go through Venice to Santa
Right.
Monica, and then cut down PCH up and up. But wow, what a career you've had.
Uh, it's been interesting. And I never thought a farm boy from Missouri would wind up in, doing the things I've done and the opportunities I've had, but that's the way God works.
Gosh, you look the same too as 2009. You look
Oh my
like
God.
really young. To me, you look
Oh,
young and sound young.
yeah. I sometimes I look in the mirror and I think, what? Who is that in the mirror? So but thank you for that. I appreciate that.
But yeah, I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much you want to share about your journey, but um, it seems like from the book you got started in your private investigation business and counterterrorism work in the private sphere. You got into that in the 70s,
Right.
and
Well,
Lebanon and Israel had a lot to do with that. So,
yeah, I came out of the Air Force I wound up in California. We were ferrying jets over to Vietnam, and I decided to get out. And so I stayed there. I was on the sheriff's department for a while and did different things and got interested in law enforcement and that kind of work. But I wanted to be the sheriff or the chief, and I knew that was going to take some time. So I was attracted to the private sector because that gave me more opportunities and I could be the boss and no politics. And so that's what led me into just starting a small private detective agency and moved down from Victorville to Los Angeles and was building the business. And I was actually, it was through the church I was involved there, First Baptist Van Nuys at that time when Dr. Fickett was there, that it introduced me to several different people and the career started. And then, in early or late 1976, I was at a Full Gospel Businessmen's uh, national convention out in Anaheim, and a man came and sat down beside me, and he was the founder, or not the founder. He had taken over West Coast Detectives in around the 50 when the founder had passed away, and he was older, and he looked at me and said, "Hey, after we talked for a while, why don't you take over my agency?" And it didn't happen. It didn't look like, but about 6 months later, he gave me a call and said, "Hey, let's do this." So
wow.
in February of 77, I took over West Coast Detectives, and it was a national agency at that time. And that started my leap forward. And I was on the board of Hyatt Venture Ministries, and that's what led me into Israel. And of course, I
Hmm.
was interested in intelligence gathering and counterterrorism. I'd had some experience in that, but I was exposed when we went up to Lebanon. And Prime Minister Begin had challenged us, and he was adamant. He said, "You Christians in the United States and Canada have been sitting silent. And the only one helping the Christians of southern Lebanon is the Jews." And so we went up and I talk about that in the first chapter of how we got involved. And it, we were amateurs. We weren't professionals because the professionals all kept turning down. They'd go there and say, "Oh, this is a war zone. I'm not going back." But we didn't have sense enough to know we couldn't do it. And George Otis was a charger. He didn't. He just said, "We're going to do this," and we found a way. So I was right in the middle of terrorism. And I was
Yeah.
talking to the military and intelligence folks, and they would tell me what was going on in the terrorist training camps when we had Americans and then people from all over the world that were being trained in those camps. And so I realized that terrorism wasn't a Middle East situation. It wasn't just about a Palestinian homeland. They had a much bigger goal than that.
Yeah. I mean, you've been shot at. I mean, some of the stories you talk
Yes.
about, like you're going directly into harm's way, and you talk about that in the book. You talk about smuggling things in.
Yeah,
uh,
and it was it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Those
think,
those nervous moments, and we get
yeah,
nervous over things. Obviously, I would have had a way out. I think the military would have come to my aid,
yeah,
but we didn't want to have to do that. So yeah,
right. I mean, as I'm reading through this, I'm constantly amazed at your ability with people, because I just feel like that skill right there
mm,
is the secret to your success, because you're always talking about
yes,
you contacts you have everywhere. I mean,
yes,
you're like going into Mexico, you know people in Mexico, you know high level people in England and Germany, um in in Israel, you know, how do you develop all those contacts? how do you have all these people that are willing to work with you? What's
Well, one, I like people. I was raised that way, and I enjoy people. I
yeah.
came from a family of servants' hearts. My grandfather, great grandfather, and father were all servants, and had that servant heart, and
Wow.
very humble men. And I and it was favored by God. I taken over West Coast Detectives. I didn't have the money, I didn't have the ability, and he sold it to me for 5 cents on the dollar and no payments for the first 3 years.
Hmm.
And it was one thing after another that favor came. And a lot of my contacts started in Israel and Lebanon through being on the board of Hyatt Venture, going there, and George Otis had that entree to the leaders because he had taken so many people there and he was known as a friend of Israel. So that gave me, by being with him and on his board, that gave me some credibility. And I just like people, and I treat people like I wanted to be treated, no matter where I'm at in the world. And so that happened there in southern Lebanon and Israel because we had the same goals as Israel had, and that was to help the people of southern Lebanon. And the more we helped there, the more it helped Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So when we started to build the radio station, the religious sector in Israel, oh, they had a fit, and Prime Minister Begin finally told them. He said, "Be silent. This is in Israel's best interest that this station get built." And so that gave us a leg up there. But and also in Europe, it started with a family friend. I had a through family relationships and connections. So I had a friend that was on the one of the commanders at French National Police, and then he introduced me to people. He would make a phone call to Scotland Yard or to French National Police, and then we were in a trip in Germany prior to the Olympics. A group of police people and us were going to crisscross Europe to find out what happened in the Munich Games disaster and try to make sure that didn't happen in the United States. So I was
Yeah.
introduced there to GSG 9. So it's just been those steps of favor by God
Right.
and seeing open doors and treating people right. I mean, I worked a lot of cases in South Los Angeles in my early days where I would be the only white guy in these places. But
Mm-hmm.
I never had any problem because I just treated the people like I was in Beverly Hills, and it worked.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be the secret of your success. I'm just like this one part where the part where you're trailing Renee, the
Yes.
Iranian arms dealer from
Yep.
London. Uh, you have to have so many different things in place just to make sure you get on the right plane because she would switch planes back then. I guess you could just walk off a plane and go onto another plane. I
Right.
guess you can't do that now, but
No.
we'll get to the Patriot Act and the response to 9/11, but let's build up to 9/11. You, but with the Renee story, I I was impressed by the that was originally a Saudi royal
No, it
member, I
wasn't
think.
Saudi. It was another country. I won't mention, but it was
Oh,
another
okay,
country there nearby.
nearby.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so was it a royal
Yeah, it
member
was
of
the
a
king.
royal?
It was yeah, it was the head guy.
Okay,
And he had some I never did really know how the connection started between Renee, but she was a beautiful woman, very sexy, very seductive. So somehow she got connected to him. And then after a while, they separated, they didn't have connection. And then she told him that, oh, she'd had a son by him. So
right.
that's how it all started. And
And
the
he was
journey was
trying
to
to
try to
check.
determine.
He was trying to check and see if that was really true, and he hired you to
That's
do that.
right. Yeah. And he wanted us to bring the son to him if that was the case.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that what impressed me was you mentioned the wire transfer. You mentioned, yeah, so we needed 25,000 to get started on retainer. And then as I'm listening to your story, I'm like, how are you making this work on 25,000 because you have
Oh, we
people
didn't. It
watching
was a
their
lot
house?
more. It was a lot more than that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you're billing him at the same along the way for expenses or
Oh,
whatever.
yes.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it was a in our field we work on a retainer and we bill out that retainer and then we get another one by the time that ends. And in this case, the man was a close friend. He was a he was very involved and he was actually part of Reagan's inner cabinet and very reputable guy, great friend. He was born in Palestine and he was an amazing man and he became a close friend and we worked on a lot of things together. He had started his father uh, from was born in Bethlehem and started taking tours to Saudi Arabia. And in that, he met King Fahd, and King Fahd took a liking to him and propelled him into this gigantic, well, they were into arms and everything else, military and all kinds of equipment. So Sam then came to the States and went to college here and then stayed here, found the Lord, and was just a great man, a great friend.
Now, this is the man who hired you, or the man that contacted
He
you
was the
to,
conduit. Yes,
okay,
he was the
gotcha.
conduit
Yeah.
because he knew all the royalty members,
Oh, okay.
and he was a conduit to us
Yeah.
to have the case.
So that that story, when for those of you who are um, listening, get the book Hostile Intent. That story is in the book, and it's quite an interesting linchpin in the story because you're initially following her and trying to find out about her. There's no records of the person under her name. And so you finally identify the woman under she's using a false name, and you find
Right.
the false name in the trash. So she's using
Right.
it for mail and
Correct.
stuff. And this is in London. And so you're working in a foreign country, and you're operating basically out of a hotel. And you have a base there. You have some kind of office
Yes.
there in London.
Yeah. We had people from Scotland Yard that worked for us off duty, and some when they retired. So we had a base there, and then
Okay,
we would augment that. We had SAS guys with weapons, and also when we needed weapons, guys, we had that ability, and that's the way it was in every the countries I
gotcha.
set up, where I had a one or two people that were all either their counterterrorism or intelligence people, and then they would staff it with people when we needed them for a particular type of case. So they fed the intelligence in on a constant basis. And then if we had a case going into that country, then we would lay it out, map it out, and do the action plan.
There's so many pieces going at now. What you ended up finding out is that the kid's story is not true, but that something else more sinister is true, and that is that she's involved in arms dealing with Iran, right? Probably a terrorist organizer. Is that right?
Yeah,
This lady?
she was an agent. She was an
Okay.
agent for that's
And
what
you actually
she
had
was
drinks with
operating
her
undercover.
at a you
Oh
had
yeah,
a club. You were
oh
having
yeah.
drinks with her at like 2 a.m. or whatever.
Well, yeah. What happened with that was she went out to all these that day, and I guess it probably is the all night clubs in
Yeah.
London were everywhere, and they would not get going till midnight. They would
Yeah.
be open till daylight, and she went there a lot. So as it worked out,
Wow.
again, favor, and I posed as the business guy, investor from America, just doing some stuff. So it attracted her interest, and yeah, we spent 2 or 3 hours there, danced together, and she was, and then she made the comment, "Well, let's get together again."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my guys kept telling me, and this woman was smart.
Yeah.
Actually, we determined that she was planning stuff in the trash. Because what
Yeah.
happened was,
Yeah.
I didn't go into that in the book, I don't think, but
You hinted at it.
um,
You hinted at it. Yeah.
we had a uh, former Scotland Yard guy that had a cleaning service, maid service, and all that. And it turned out he was handling her house. He had maids and cleaners and butlers all in her house. So we got an agent planted as an employee in the house, and that's how we learned a lot of the intelligence and up to date stuff of what she was doing. That's how we learned she was planting stuff in the trash because this agent had overheard and she was laughing about it because before we got involved, we found out that somebody else, they had tried to use somebody else who were amateurs apparently because they blew their cover.
Hmm.
And she was laughing about that. and that she
Oh,
exposed them, and so we knew that when there was something in the trash about her trip, we could fear that maybe that was a red herring.
yeah.
So we had to prepare, and of course, like you say, that day we had a lot of cash. People would have a bag with them if they had to get on a plane, like follow her in a car and get out of their car and go there. They could. Well, we couldn't do
Yeah.
that now, though.
Yeah.
It'd be much more difficult. But that was
Right.
what was happening a lot. You just had to have a lot of people in the right places, ready to go, ready for any contingency that might, come up.
So the issue of trust is kind of important because to not to understate it, you have all these people that are ready to go at a moment's notice working for you, and you have to trust them. Like, how do you trust all those people? Did you know all these people personally? Had you met them all, or had you vetted them all?
Yeah, yeah. Everybody that worked for us, we vetted heavily, but we started with the right people because everybody we had on those staffs was already with their governments or had been,
Okay.
and they were vetted intensely. Some of them still had their top secret clearances if they were retired. A lot of the SAS guys were active guys,
Hmm.
and so, and then our man in in Scotland Yard, he was a top criminologist in Europe. He ran the Black Museum. Um, and it's not really known a lot. It's used just for law enforcement, but the Black Museum was set up in London at Scotland Yard, and it has all the cases, all the back Jack the Rippers there, all the unsolved cases that
Wow.
were not solved were put in there. And Waddell's work was try to solve those cases, try to reopen them. So it's a fascinating museum. It's a member. You have to know somebody to get in, but it's fascinating museum. So Bill knew everybody, so he would vet, and we made sure that our people were righteous and right and upright, standing and honest in every way. And we never ever had an issue. I never ever had an issue in any country of the world with any people that we had. I had some in America occasionally, but never there.
That's interesting. What kind of issues would you have with people in America, by contrast?
Well, sometimes they would try to steal the client from you, thinking that
Mm-hmm.
they got smarter, and they
Mm-hmm.
would, or they weren't honest. They would just lie and say they did something they didn't, or when something would happen, they would say they didn't do it. So it was an integrity issue so many times. Really, I found over the years, and really showed in our field and the work we were doing inside of companies, but that the work ethic and the individual ethics in people from the time in the 70s after I took over West Coast, we had like over 1,000 employees.
Wow.
You saw the the work ethic in the workplace just deteriorate, and
Mm.
we had internal theft and pilferage problems in companies that went nationally. It was a few $1 million a year. Then it went to hundreds of millions, and then it went to billions a year that was being lost in the workplace because of unethical employees, of
Mm.
theft, stealing, drugs. So you saw that disintegration in the States. I didn't see that. Well, I wasn't working at that level in other
Right.
countries, but I never had that issue in other countries.
You mentioned that you were trying to, you had this West Coast detectives, and it seemed like you had, I think I pieced this together as I was reading it. You had a steady business with corporate clients, um, and I was able to piece that together with some comments you made. And at the same time, you were trying to build an intelligence capability that was worldwide. That my understanding was that didn't exist when you took the company over. Is that right?
That's
You built
that's
that.
right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, the primary business, we were a corporate investigation agency. When I took it over, we had a lot of security guards in that time, uniform security, and I ultimately phased out of that. But we were an investigation agency of corporate, but we had a lot of consumer clients. We would do. I still took in a small case if it was somebody that had a problem. it was just as important to them if it was a $500 problem as it was to a $1 million problem to a big client. So we would take those, but our volume of clients was in the corporate field. We did a lot of government work, spatial things, spatial type of stuff. But the big thing was corporations, undercover investigations, and that drove the agency. So when I started the
Yeah.
international division, I I was in front of my time because terrorism wasn't a big thing in the States at that time. So
Mhm.
I was trying to build it into where the idea of building intelligence. An old police chief told me out in Buena Park when I started in the private sector, came out of law enforcement. He said, Phil, build your intelligence files because it might be 10 years, 15 or 20, but they'll make you a lot of money. So that's what I really knew the importance of building intelligence and having that information, even if you didn't have to use it then. But of course, that takes money. And the idea is in the private sector is to have a base, a revenue base for that. So that's what I was working on building.
Wow. What kind of can you describe some of the corporate work that you were doing, the investigations that you were working on? What
Anything in the imagination, we've done. It started. Sometimes the phone call would start with a company wanting to buy another company. So they wanted a due diligence package to determine who was the company, what was not known about them, and sometimes we're public companies.
Mhm.
So we would do a complete workup. Sometimes it would be they were hiring a president or a high executive. We would do a dossier on them from the time they were born until that date. Sometimes it would be a company that was wanted to open overseas, and that's why I developed and wanted to develop the bases in other countries. They might say, "Well, I want to set up in France or Germany, or even in we had in Eastern Europe. We had Lithuania and other places. So we would then do a whole due diligence package on that country, including the politics. Where should they go? What was the safety issues? Was there a threat to Americans in those particular countries? And where should their employees live if they go there? All those. So they had a complete package. So
Mhm.
what I was doing, I wasn't really looking for it, but in intelligence we gathered, we got all kinds of the stuff that the intelligence agencies would die for. It was just given to us because we were private. They weren't committing treason to give it to us. So they would just tell us all about what the leaders were thinking, where they were going, what the next 2 or 3 years might be, because we wanted to know, was it safe longevity for our clients to invest millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, into those countries. So we did all that. And then the other call we got a lot would be for undercover operations. They would say, we just got a tip that there was internal theft or drug operations going on in our company. So we would go in, set up, get employees hired without anybody knowing it, except the top 2 or 3 people. And so that would go on. The best story I have on that is we put an undercover agent in a company as in the mailroom, and he started there. The information that he was given the owner of the company was so valuable to him, they just kept moving him around. He retired 23 years later, still working for us and working for that company as a vice president. That's how important that
Wow.
undercover was. That's how
Wow.
valuable it was to somebody because you had really what was going on in your workplace. It wasn't coming from yes people or people saying, oh, everything's great. So we did a lot of that. And we did a lot of backgrounds for companies as well as individuals, very minimal backgrounds up to very intense backgrounds. But the phone would ring and there would be a story on it. One of my favorite ones was we had a lady come in our office there in North Hollywood, and she was from France, and she'd been there 30 years in the States, but she sounded like she just got off the boat. And she had this story. She told us that she'd been married to a top general in as young. She was young, he was older in France. They had 2 children, and when the children were about 4 or 5, something happened. I didn't really know all that happened, but she had to leave the country. And the order was leave the country. And she did without the children. And this had been 20 some years. She had not seen the children or been able to communicate with them in any way. And her request was, could you find my children? And within a few hours, even in that time, I contacted our head of operations in Paris. And of course, the general was well known. And in a matter of hours, he had tracked down the two kids who were both working for the government at that time. And a week or two later, in our office, she had a phone call with the two kids who were sobbing. Everybody was sobbing on the phone. And a few weeks later, they came to the United States and met with her. Now,
Wow.
I would have done that job for free,
Hmm.
but that's the kind of things you just never knew what was going to happen. But we were able to really change people's lives and give them hope and peace in their lives. So that's a lot of what we do.
Did you ever work pro bono for free?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. We did a
Okay.
lot of things, a lot of particularly single moms that were dealing with issues of a divorce, and they didn't have any money, and
Yeah.
and they needed help. But in other situations, we had other situations that we would get referred, or somebody would call me and say, "Hey, can you help them out?" They said, "Yes, we did that."
Wow. Now, are you still working or are you retired?
No, no, no. We're still. Um, I was
Still
in prior
going.
to the prior to the pandemic, about 2 years, 2018. I got involved in an operation in Mexico, heading up the security operation for precious metals, and ultimately wound up taking it over, and
Hmm.
then started building it out. And then the pandemic hit, and so that just really messed everything up. But and a lot of the stuff we were doing out around the world, in other countries, got stopped for the pandemic, and those things aren't coming back because they were
Hmm.
the kind of situations that we're sensitive, and the situation in countries. But a lot of our corporate stuff and private individual stuff, yeah, that's continued on. And so my sons are primarily doing most of that, but I'm still involved and watching over and talking to clients, and not quite as physical active as I used to be. But I love that. I love what I and because it was. So I was licensed and ordained to the ministry when I was 20. My mother raised me to be a preacher, and I was in the Southern Baptist Church, did a lot of evangelistic work. I was a youth minister and a worship leader, or then it was a music director. And but God really led me out of that. Everybody thought, oh, he's going into full time ministry, but God led me into the business world, and with the understanding, the thought was, I want you to go to the world, but I want you to go on your own dime. You will support yourself, and you will take nothing out of any country you go into.
Hmm.
And so God opened up ministry all over the world from the foolishness of a private eye. People wanted to hear what a private investigator from California had to say, and they all knew about, in these countries where you go, they'd all watch the old PI shows. It was amazing. They knew more about them sometimes than I did. But that opened doors. So I've been blessed all over the world where I've been able to have open doors, both for business and ministry. So it fulfilled both. Uh, in my life, I really believe that we don't have a secular and a spiritual life. It's supposed to be all one. And
Yeah.
whatever we're called to do in life, we go about serving and helping people and blessing everybody we can.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me was when I was reading your book, uh, I forget exact. I think it was when you were doing the investigative work at LAX, and I know that that happened several different times. But I think it was right before 9/11. Um, you mentioned that you had a Wednesday night Bible group at your house, and you mentioned
Right.
church, and I just thought, wow, what was your life like? Because you throw little things like that in, and it sounds like a very normal home where you have a predictable schedule. You're going to be there on Wednesdays, and you have time and energy to interact with people at church and build relationships. Have them over at your house, and I forget. Did you say Sherman Oaks or is
Well, yeah,
uh,
it was,
San Fernando Valley somewhere?
yeah, seven Van Nuys. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
Well, when I first took over West Coast, I was young. I was in over my head. I didn't know it, but there was a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was in at a church. where Joey Dawson also went, which is a renowned world Bible teacher and leader, speaker involved in leadership all over the world. And I had George Otis there who got me involved. So I don't know what you remember or not, but they had a program called the Here's Life America back in 1976. It was a campus crusade all across the country, the United States, churches all over. And they had a slogan. It was on billboards all over Los Angeles, on bumper stickers, and it just said, I found it. That's all it said. So people said, what do you mean I found it? The idea was to be able to share with them the gospel message. And so after that, we had that in 76. Joey Dawson came to me one morning at church and said, Phil, in her New Zealand accent, I believe God wants you to go to New Zealand and take this program. I said, well, what? I'm this young guy that's just started building a business and I'd only taken the business over a few months before. And I sought God, and she told me, see, God, you hear from him. Don't take it from me. And July of 1977, I was on a first airplane, really across the ocean, and went to New Zealand and spent 3 weeks sharing with churches all across, all denominations across New Zealand. And then when I came back, it was, we saw that we'd had such an evangelistic outpouring from that Here's Life America that I started a school of evangelism at our church, which is still going on today. And
what church is that again?
Osborne Neighborhood Church in San Fernando Valley. And it was a church about 500, and it was interdenominational, and it was just an awesome church. And but the more I would put in there, the more God would take care of my time in the business. It was amazing. And so for many years, I led that, built it up, and it was a training program built on a program out of a Presbyterian church in Florida called the Evangelism Explosion. And you take people out and you train them. You just don't say, oh, go knock on doors. And it was very effective. So I did that. And then I've done, all kinds of ministry things. I traveled a lot and I was gone sometimes, but normally I wouldn't be gone more than 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Rarely, once in a while, maybe. So there was always somebody to fill in if I was gone. But my life was normal, my family life, my church life, involved in a ministry and ministering to people. But yeah, it wasn't like this constant, like a guy in the military that was gone so much, So it was a good balance.
Wow. That to me, I just kept thinking it sounds like a lot of work. And it sounds like it's I mean, if you have steady clients and you have money coming in, maybe it's not pins and needles and you're confident about being paid. Like how were you confident about being paid? Were you ever worried that you're going to do a bunch of work and then not get paid for it and cover your expenses?
Everything investigative was retainer. We did nothing without retainer, no matter who it was, no matter how big the company, no matter how well I knew them.
They pay up front.
We worked on retainers. Yeah, just like you take a budget and say, okay, I think this case might cost this, so we take a retainer, and then we wouldn't go beyond a retainer before we got that. We would get another retainer. Now, in the security field, where I would have maybe 20, 30, 40 people at one company, then we build them. And it was done on a 2-week basis. And these were reputable, big companies. So I never had any issue. Oh, I had my losses were really small. Yeah, we had some along, but yeah, by having that cash flow from retainers, you were able to know that, yeah, we're getting things covered.
Did you ever investigate your own company or was that just something you constantly did?
Well, yeah, the Bible says, know the state of your flocks and herds. So I would have people that would take a look, but I was out there very involved. Even on the ground, when we had a lot of operations around Los Angeles, we had a lot of big electronic companies and others, television studios we had. And so I would be out around too, but I would have people go in unbeknownst to any of the other employees and just give me a status report. So I knew, what was going on. And I was blessed by having this awesome people that came to us that we were able to train, able to get our philosophy. We were known as a praying detective agency. And hey, people didn't have to pray with us. I had a lot of people that didn't. I had a lot of people that weren't, didn't know the Lord, but that was fine. as long as they followed our moral code and our code of how we treat people, and we do what we say and when we say it. And that's what I found in our field was the biggest problem. People would come to me and say, I hired this private detective and I give him this big retainer, and I hardly get a hold of him. Now I can't get a hold of him. I can't get any information. I can't get a report. So
Uh,
we
yeah.
vowed never to be like that.
Okay. So now, hmm, were these employees that you were hiring, or were they contracted out? These people that you'd send in to do investigations?
They were employees, most of them. We had a lot of
Okay.
on call people that for special operations,
Uh-huh.
let's say a strike force or some very um, specific kind of situation, then we would have on call people. But in those days, most everybody we had were employees. And now it's gone to more, you have a lot of contract people and
Yeah.
you use them when you need them.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were, part of the West Coast family.
What was your secret to keeping your employees and your contractors, your vendors? Oh, actually, I don't know what the word is, but the people you'd
Clients or
contract out,
whatever. Yeah.
the people
Well,
you would hire as a contractor. How do you keep them happy so that I mean, obviously, if you keep them happy and they like working for you, then you trust them more, I guess, because
well,
unhappy
well,
employees.
yeah. Well, we had a reputation. People knew us in the field. And one, we would do backgrounds even on contractors. And one, most of the contractors that were good were working for different people. They would be available to different ones in our field for that specialty that they had.
Yeah.
So, people would we would pay them more, but we took care of them, and we had a lot of those people that said, "I wish I could work for you all the time," But
Mm.
it was a special type of talent they had. For those, yeah, that's what we did, and we again we had a reputation. We were called many times the little FBI. We had a reputation for what we did, and we were the best at what we did, and we believed that, and we worked hard to fulfill that. To
Yeah. I believe
My
it.
pet thing was, I'm an action person, but I don't like confrontations. So I never wanted a client to call me saying, "Your guy screwed up here," and I worked
Yeah.
hard not to have that happen, and it
Uh,
rarely ever did. So yeah, that's what kept me driving.
I believe it. Let's go back to before 9/11. Let's go back to the state of the airports in the 90s. You mentioned that the Clinton administration had a different political philosophy of these terrorist activity that were happening in 93, for example, and then later in Africa, the USS Cole. Um, those were all Al Qaeda hits, and you have a whole story of how Al Qaeda was born. Um, the Clinton administration viewed those as criminal acts, not acts of war.
Sure.
And you linked that with a dismantling of our intelligence capabilities, which I imagine were at their height during the Cold War. Would you say that's fair?
Yes, there
Was
was
it okay?
because yeah, the need was, oh, well, the world's safer now. So particularly on the human acts agent, the human part,
Yeah,
the physical, the human agent,
yeah,
that was let go and stopped us not as much. And when I found out from the inside, when I was involved with the government agency after 9/11, I was amazed. Uh, the press was right. They didn't have much.
hmm,
So that was going on. But, the big problem with the airport situation was in the States, was different from many other countries in the world. We had so many different people that were supposedly involved for security. We had FAA, we had the airports, we had
yeah,
airport security, and all these factors. And so when you would, on one of the audits that I did, they had wished they hadn't done it because it
yeah,
was documented and reports went to everybody. But then it started, well, that's not my responsibility. FAA is supposed to do that.
yeah,
FAA said, no, the airports are supposed to do that. And so there was no cohesiveness. And a lot of that was passing the buck. And then the airports on their security, they were cost conscious. So they would hammer
Right.
their security vendors. Oh, we got to decrease this cost. And so
Yeah.
what would they do? They had to cut corners on backgrounds on the people they hired. And so that was a big problem prior to.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to think of what it would be like for a younger person to read this book. I'm reading it because I remember how the airports were before 9/11.
Yes.
Many of us do. Um, and there were some cool things. I mean, you could go to the gate and see everybody off, and there were lots of old pictures I have with my grandpa when I was in the Navy. He comes
Mm,
right to the gate and waves at me when I get on the plane
yep.
and and stuff. But you narrate, for example, being hired by LAX to conduct an in-depth audit that was over several months, and not just once, but you were hired more than once. And
Yeah.
it's
We
it
had
they
undercover operations there too. Yeah.
yeah, they were there were criminal activity. There was drugs. There was all sorts of
Right.
stuff that was like blatant in your face stuff. Like you talk about people just walking out with a suitcase off the plane, like directly off the plane.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
you,
The
you
baggage handlers. Yep.
getting into the baggage area so easily that you talk. Would you mind describing what you saw for everyone? Because
Well,
that's important context for 9/11. Because people don't realize just how lax the and it was a systemic issue because of the cost issue. The competition
yeah.
between the airlines to reduce fees and stuff. It was a race to the bottom for fees, but then that was kind of a disaster for security.
Yeah. It was uh, uh, the lack of security because the people in charge really didn't understand the importance of it. And there wasn't, I found in any place I've gone into, if the man at the top, was a president or head of an airport, if they have a strong security conscious and awareness and they communicate that down, then you have a whole different environment in your workplace.
Yeah.
And at the airports, we had uh, all this breakup I'm talking about, no cohesiveness. So we had the airport or the vendor, the security vendors, doing their own thing, hiring as least as they could, giving a band aid to security because the employees knew that there wasn't things in place to catch them.
Yeah.
They had these dark holes they could go into, and they knew that there was
The
such a
cameras weren't
lackness of
even
security.
working. You said there was like
Yeah,
the cameras were just for show. They weren't even working.
yeah, and there were places that there wasn't any. Just because, uh, and even though there had been recommendations, I'm sure there had been other recommendations besides ours that had been done over the years, and so um, they would do these things and it would not bring about any results. What
Yeah.
happened with this last big audit we did just about a year before 9/11, um, this thing was, I don't know, 150-page report or whatever it was.
That was
It
the
was
one
huge.
that was leaked to the
Yeah.
media.
Yeah. And everyone was confidential, stamped by a number and who it was given to. And so we had, all that.
Smart. Yeah.
And then they, like I said, they were wishing that they had them started that audit because now it was on paper, it was published, but
Yeah.
they did nothing with it. And so that year later or so, what it was, I got this call from a reporter saying, "Oh, would you like to comment on your what? What do you mean?" I denied it at first. I said, "No way, we didn't do any audit there. What do you mean?" And he said, "Well," he started reading me on your names. Well, okay, I'm no comment, but I don't know. Somebody out there from the airport leaked it for whatever reason, and but even then, even after the fact, uh, as an example, what they did initially after 9/11 was tighten up supposedly the getting on and in the airport, getting through the gate, getting to
Right.
the gate. So they had more visible people. They had some X-rays and all that. But you could drive around to the back gate of the airport and come in pretty easily
Yeah.
without any restrictions. There was ways to get on the ramp. get into the airport, and then the baggage control people were still not monitored. It wasn't
Yeah.
controlled. So it was all for public consumption.
Yeah.
And it was so, again, a mismatch. I'm a private sector guy. I'm not I don't like government doing stuff any more than necessary, what they need to do. But in this sense, I told them at the time they needed a security force that was professional, that was uniform at all airports, that had some kind of probably federal control, but it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't left up to the airport or to the airlines
Mm-hmm.
to do security. Now, they've tried to do that with the TSA, but that's become a boondoggle, like everything else the government tries to do. But that was the things that I found. They just didn't fix the problems when
Yeah.
you told them about it.
Well, that makes sense from just a human incentive perspective, because if the market is what is supplying the incentive for security, it's only when people die, and really horrifically and publicly, and enough people are afraid, that you can profit from investing in security and letting people know about it. And even then, just the very nature of security is a lot of it is secret, so you can't be public about it. I mean, if it's effective, uh,
Right.
there's always a tendency to window dress something for the public so that they think they're getting value of it, but that might not be what actually has value. And
That's right.
so I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned in the book too about what happened in France and in Europe. Of course, that was I mean, they were going wild all across Germany and France and Italy and IRA,
Yeah.
and but
Yeah.
it took in Paris because they started those appeasements. They let terrorists out. They said it was kind of like, don't operate on French soil, but we'll let you out. But
Yeah.
one day in Paris in '86, they had 12 terrorist attacks in Paris in one day.
Wow.
And that was the turning point. They overdid it. The public
Hmm.
just said, that's enough. And so they rose up, and then France, set up a really vigilant counterterrorism and started crashing down on them. But it took that all those disasters and people's lives lost to get finally the uprising that stopped these politicians who were,
Yeah.
I don't get them. I just don't understand these
Hmm.
kind of people with their leftist viewpoints and appeasement. That doesn't work. Not
Yeah.
with terrorists, it doesn't work. That's for sure.
Right.
Or any type of crime,
It's a
really.
fundamental misunderstanding of human nature, I think, is that
That's right.
you can somehow manipulate people by looking like you're sorry for things that are not really your fault, but
That's right.
apologizing for, I don't know, colonialism or something like that. They're not your individual fault, right? And so your apology, I think an apology only is effective is if you're apologizing for something that you did, like you individually,
Right.
because you're the one issuing the apology. Yeah, I don't understand that kind of naivete either. But and I don't remember. I wasn't old enough to remember the 1986 things. But in your book, you which was before all the things that happened in Paris or in France in 2015. Quite a few things happened
Right.
in 2015. This is before
Right.
that. And in your
Right.
book, you seem to almost predict that France is going to have
Yes.
more problems
Yes.
because they were
There
getting
was
lax.
all we had to do was look and remember that the terrorists are patient. They will wait, work, deceive, while we are and the West, particularly what we do. We have and that would happen when the terrorist attack occurred in Europe. The phones would ring off the hook
Hmm.
for about 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And then it's over if they forgot about it. So while the
Right.
terrorists across the world are day by day building, getting ready for that next hit, all they need is one big one.
Right.
And we are sitting back saying, oh, things are great. Nothing's going on. And I had companies tell me this so much. Well, we don't really have a problem. Why do we need all that security stuff in? And
Right.
then they would have a major problem. So that's what happens is
Right.
we get complacent, and we saw it coming. We saw the purpose behind it. And I had hundreds of meetings. In like 1 year and a half prior to the Olympics, I had over 500 meetings. I mean, lunches, dinners, and sometimes I thought I was a politician running for office. except I never make that. But I just went everywhere talking about the dangers of terrorism. But I didn't want to leave people with a violent feel. Oh, it's hopeless, hopeless.
Right.
My goal was share enough about the problem, then tell them what they could do, how
Mm.
we could have hope, and what one person to do. And if one starts, and we then become a an army of ones, we
Yeah.
can turn around the tide. So that was my goal with talking about terrorism and violence. And I got a lot of response. I wish I had that going on, because then people were coming up to me, said, Phil, we want to get involved with you. How can we help you? Can we give you money? Can we? I had no organization. I was a businessman, but I
Yeah.
thought now, if I had that, hey, we have a podcast going, we'd have a
Yeah.
organization going, and
Right.
we would mobilize people, like some, and several have done that, which is awesome.
So in the wake of 9/11, of course, we had the Patriot Act, and there was a lot of initially there was a lot of agreement about how to proceed across
Yes.
partisan lines, and that agreement began to break down. The libertarians always seem to be hypercritical of the Patriot Act and the TSA and everything like that. You're not like exactly filled with praise all the way down about all that stuff either, but you are very clear that the Patriot Act, Patriot Act was necessary, and even its reauthorization was necessary. Uh, how do you feel about it now? Have you changed your mind about that? And especially in the light of like the J6 stuff, I've heard that some of the it's hard to know exactly what's happening with those defendants, but I've heard stories of abuse, and I've heard
Yes.
stories of going too far, using the war power against our own citizens. And I'm not sure if you have any comment about that, or if you have any concerns about that.
Yes, major. Obviously, like you said at the beginning, there was a the patient was seriously ill, and you needed to have serious um, uh, procedures to help the patient,
Mhm.
and that's what the Patriot Act started out. And part of the problem here in the United States before that, like the FBI, the CIA, and police agencies, there was no communication like there should have been. There
Yeah.
was too much turf war, so that did help with that, even though there's still some of that. But now, what has happened with the politicalization of our, I mean, I am, the FBI was the premier agency in the world. It's not anymore.
Mm.
For what it is, and that's not because of the men and women down in the ranks. It's because of those political appointees at the top,
Yeah.
and uh, and now the misuse of that power, of what they're using in. I'm saying, and I think I know some Jim Jordan and others are talking about. Hey, we scrap it and we get something that really works, that can't be misused, by that has enough controls that the party in power, no matter who it is, can't use it to their own end. And we're in danger. We're in real danger here. And the public needs to wake up, because we think it will never happen here, what we've seen in other countries of totalitarian rule and takeover. But if we let our freedoms keep being taken away from us and not saying anything, and we're in real trouble.
Yeah. I mean, some of the stuff from the J6 stuff that I catch every now and then, I haven't done the workup on this that I want to do. I'm listening to the Lawfare podcast, and I started at the beginning, and I'm working my way all the way through that podcast. And I know they cover quite a bit of the J6 stuff, but they come from a leftist kind of a bent, and that's why I'm listening to it, because I want to hear what they're saying. They were in 2013, they were talking about drones a lot. They were talking about the war on terror, Guantanamo, all that stuff. And recently they're talking about the J6 stuff. But my concern is the issue of evidence that's being hidden. Um, I've never heard of of that kind of problem with American citizens before, where they can't get the evidence they need to, or a speedy trial, for example, these basic rights, discovery. And I worry that there's been some line crossed maybe with the American people. Like what I mean is I wonder, because I'm an educator and I see what the classroom is like. And I'm not really, all that old or anything. I have, about 2 decades of experience in the classroom, and I've been very disturbed by what I've seen on the college campuses. And I'm very disturbed by people who I know spend a lot of time on the college campuses and what kind of people they're becoming. And I just know that there's a lot of sloppy thinking. There's a lot of non-thinking. There's very short attention spans. That's made worse by social media. And the lockdowns and the response to the public health panic and stuff in the last few years, I've worried about government overreach in that area, and the reaction of people, what that's done to people's mental health. I'm just wondering the kind of people we are we able to govern ourselves? Do we have, do you have the same belief in the ordinary person like Ronald Reagan did? Like he believed that you just tell them the facts, they'll make the right decision. Are you confident like you used to be in the American
Well,
people?
I had that confidence like Ronald Reagan too. The highlight was when I debated the ACLU leadership there in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
and 95% of the membership that was there, there was, I don't know, 200, 300 people there, and
Was this in the
supported
80s?
me.
You're talking about in
Yeah,
the 80s?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they saw what I didn't come as anything to political party,
Right, right,
and I
right.
just presented the facts. And I believe, as I said many times, you give the American people the facts, and then they were going to make the right decision. That's all changed.
Hmm.
I see now, uh, and so many people are so um, uh, brainwashed, I guess to call it, by their political party
Yeah.
or by wanting something for nothing,
Yes.
and thinking that um, this free stuff is just going to come to them, and they don't think for themselves. They think whatever their party says, they do,
Hmm.
and we're in danger. And this is what has happened when I've done some extensive studies on countries I was in out around the world who were free and then became totalitarian or dictator type rule,
Yeah.
and all of them followed the same pattern. And but if people would only, they won't take the time to find out. You could find that stuff out now real easy on the internet of what's going on. But we've gotten complacent, we've gotten lazy,
Yeah.
we've just gotten we believe whatever we're told. And my message would be to the American citizen: forget your party to decide, Republican, Democrat, Independent. What does the candidate say, and what is their position that is true to the Constitution, to godly principles, the moral applications of everything to do with what God says, and vote for that candidate, even if they're on the other party. If your candidate doesn't have that, if they're on the other side, so but we won't do that, and we're just going to blindly follow what has been in our families. Like one black leader was talking recently about the black population. And he said that's why what is happening. All they know, how they've been trained in their families, is you vote Democratic, and it's just like habit,
Yeah.
and they just keep doing it.
It's very common. Yeah. What when you if someone listening to this was interested in working in your line of work or even for your company, what kind of training or what kind of person would you suggest they work on becoming or having? What kind of training would you suggest they try to have to do the work you were doing and to do it well?
Well, general private investigative work, they have their specialties in homicide, arson. We have those kind of things, electronic or computer. But the basic investigator who's doing background investigative surveillance, the basic stuff. I've always said that 50% is common sense, and the other 50% is experience. Now,
Mhm.
having criminal justice courses, understanding law, those are good. Uh, Getting information in from a general criminal um, background is good. In the private sector, you don't have you're not doing a lot of criminal work, and there are not a lot of places in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, and into early 2000s. We had a training academy in Los Angeles, and we trained investigators, and we had a good track record. Everybody that were willing to be replaced got hired,
Hmm.
but I don't know of anyone doing that right now around. But yeah, uh, just develop your common sense. If you're personable, be if you like people and people like you, then that's a big plus because you can talk to people and they'll tell you things. I found out many times going through the front door. I had people tell me when I became a private investigator, they said, "Oh, how can you do that? You're spying on people. You're telling lies. How can a Christian be a private eye?" I said, "Well, hey, God sent out the first spies. You just don't have to tell a lie, or you don't have to go through the back door and break in. You go to the front door and knock on the door." And so many times we would do that, and people wouldn't want to talk, but you'd stand there and be nice and friendly and talk, and suddenly they would start telling you stuff you wanted to know. So having those traits in your life is good. And it's hard to find any place you can start and be an intern at. In our field, it's not big enough or broad enough to where occasionally you might find that. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
do those kind of things. And if you have a passion, if you like it and love it, and we had awesome women investigators working for us. And I would go in places and these women would say, "Oh, I know I would be a great private investigator. I just love it." Well, women are much better in some ways than men because they're intuitive and their instincts, if they really like that kind of work. So if you love it, pursue it, find a way, and you'll make it.
Hmm. The part where you were at the nightclub with Renee, the Iranian agent, the terrorist organizer, and she had given you her number or something like that, or you guys were
Yeah.
exchanging numbers, and the
Yeah.
the you had to make a choice of whether to follow up with this the next day or two and continue it. And I remember in the book you say that you were worried that she was smarter than you and she was going to get you information. It was going to be the other way around. She was going to be getting information from you instead of you getting
Yeah.
information from her. That's what you mean by common sense, right? Like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
and then
Don't, if you're a guy,
you stopped at that moment where yeah.
yeah, if you're a guy, don't let the pretty face get you too much.
Yeah.
And two, I think part of the interest was she thought I was an investor, a big time
Yeah,
investor,
that's right.
and she was looking for money on
Yeah,
stuff
that's
too.
right. That's right.
So yeah, trying to con somebody in. I mean, she was seductive, so she
You
would
don't
use
have
whatever.
you don't have any information or any comments about China, I don't think, in your book. Do you have any thoughts about China?
Well, I've been to China. I
Yeah.
actually did investigative work in China back in the 80s.
Oh, is that right? Oh.
You had to have a uh, a Chinese attorney with you, but yeah, it was possible to do.
Hmm.
I had an office in Hong Kong, and I spent a lot of time over there. Um,
Hmm.
Obviously, um, it's very obvious that China is probably at its most dangerous positions, even from the start of Mao and the Chinese uprising revolution. Now it has positioned itself, and we've allowed it, and we've just been sitting on the back a lot that militarily and what they have accomplished and have in place, and with the leader's philosophy of control.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer. If you read the Bible and believe it all in the Bible, and I tell people, if you don't believe, read Revelations and see a little bit. You get an idea of what's going to happen. Well, I believe with what's going on in the world, what has happened, what the events that we see right now with violence, with suppressing people's rights,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to get people to believe only what you tell the leaders tell you. You can't have your own opinion, as if with the COVID thing and vaccines and all that. That's happening all over the world. It's just not in the
Yeah.
United States.
Right.
There is something different going on this time.
Mm.
It's not Hitler. Yeah. And people say, oh, we've had all this disasters, violent stuff,
Right.
the whole history. Well, it has been. This time it's different. Read the warnings, the signs of the times. And so I believe that I would not be surprised if China moves sooner than later into Taiwan. They've been emboldened from my still reaches into intelligence and things, but they've been boldened by our current administration. They know he won't act.
Yeah. Right.
They've got enough on him that he won't. Now, with the world being so focused on Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
uh, he they're the timing is something here,
Right.
and I think he's determining if somebody like Trump or somebody really powerful gets in the next election, his window will close again.
Yeah.
So I would not be surprised if we see a movement before the next election. And you see things happening there now. It's escalating all the time. They're pressing the envelope. Um,
We're
the
recording
biggest
this on,
danger to,
well, I'm just going to say the date. It's June 21st, 2023.
yeah,
So you're saying that before the next election will be the 24 election. Yeah.
yeah. The way things are shaping, unless something big happens to stop their ambition. But the biggest issue we have, the biggest danger we have, is from China.
Yeah.
You know, not
I
even though Russia we know could
that's
be bad,
the
but
the country I've been watching the closest for the last 25 years or so. Um, in fact, when I was Nicolette's age, your daughter, when she was in my logic and practice course at Pierce, I think it was fall of 2009. Um, when I was her age and I was uh, going through school, I had a big poster of a map that the People's Republic of China, of the People's Republic of China, from the People's Republic of China's point of view. It's in characters, it's in Chinese characters. And when you look at that map, it's a physical map. It's before the internet. um, they, it's shocking. It's shocking to people if they look carefully at it because they draw the international boundary outside of Taiwan. That's not surprising, but what's shocking is how they look at Korea. They have Korea, the whole Korean peninsula is just called Korea, and the capital's Pyongyang. That's how they see it. And this is a map that was in the 90s. I mean, this is uh this is how they saw the world. And that's pretty scary. Like one of our major trading partners doesn't even see South Korea as a different country. And that's how they look at Taiwan. Are you disturbed at what's happened in Hong Kong the last few years?
oh, that was devastating because it was interesting. The man that I connected with that ran my office in Hong Kong, excuse me, he had defected from the Chinese Red Army
Hmm.
and then wound up going to Scotland Yard, and he became one of the heads of the Hong Kong police. And so
Wow.
when he retired, that was, I was working with him, we were working together. That was before, we're still
Right.
strong,
Yeah.
and so many people fled the country. Now he stayed, was able to survive okay, but oh yeah, that was Hong Kong was such. I Before I went to the first time, I said I don't want to go. What? I don't want to go to Hong Kong. I'll go to Paris. Forget Hong Kong. But I went to Hong Kong and I
Mhm.
fell in love with the place. There was such a blend of Europe and the Far East. The people were fabulous,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was very very disheartened to see what happened, and international policy and I don't get some of the things that they do, why they do them, but anyway, yeah, I wished it had been different.
Yeah. That map that I was referring to, they had their international boundary drawn around the South China Sea, the entire sea.
Right.
That's how they saw that back in the 90s. And they were not able to
Right.
enforce it, but ever since then they've been doing things to try to. And you're right, our distractions have been on the war on terror. Now, it's hard to, I mean, we all have a limited attention span. It's not like we can be doing everything at once, but um uh, now with the Ukraine, I do worry about a divided attention span, which some people might think of as an opportunity to expand their power in China. That's, it's a big worry of mine. I'm glad to hear that it's on your radar. Um, what do you what would let me go back to your briefly to your childhood. What was your childhood like? How did you become the person you are? Did you grow up in a rural area? Did you learn how to
Yeah.
fish and hunt and shoot and all that stuff?
Oh yeah. I grew up on a farm. I was born on a farmhouse in northern Missouri, Ravenna, out just about, 30 miles, 40 miles south of the Iowa line. And on the old Outlaw Trail where Jesse and Frank James used to ride down, my my grandmother used to tell the story that she and her sister would be walking to town. They were 12, 13, and Jesse and Frank would be coming back from north, robbing a bank in Iowa. They would stop and pick them up and take them into town. And so I grew up in that. My grandfather was had general stores and property and farms. We well had farms, and so he was kept the whole area alive during the Depression. But until he couldn't anymore, he just
Hmm.
fed everybody. And so I grew up in that farm, and then my dad, when I was about six, uh, we left the farm, and he took over a Southern Baptist church camp down in Chillicothe, Missouri, about the center of the state. And so, but my parents, I was in church when I was born, and thereafter I received the Lord when I was seven. At a radio, listened to a radio that I told my mother I want to receive. I was baptized. I was in church, praying parents, godly. I never ever heard my father raise his voice to my mother. I never heard them argue in my whole life. I'm sure in private they did their thing, but they were godly. My parents were godly saints of people. So I was raised with praying, believing who God is, and not looking on color. Even though I was in Missouri near the
Yeah.
Mason-Dixon line, hey, it was I was raised. God doesn't look on color. And then after high school, but they still had the draft, so I went into the military. But it was that godly uh, upbringing, the discipline of farming and living in that. You had to work. I
Yeah.
was working when I was a kid, and I thank God for that. And I wish, even though I got two great sons, I said, wow, it would be great to have a lot more kids grow up on farm life and get those disciplines in your life. And then of course I went in the military because I figured I would get drafted if I didn't, so I went in the Air Force.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that was the basis of that set the tone for my life and taught me to pray, to seek God. And I wished in those early days I would have heard His voice a lot clearer.
Hmm.
I didn't know His voice like I got to know it when I realized the Holy Spirit in me and who I was. But it was a good foundation, and I never strayed from it. I knew my parents had great desires for me. It wasn't like I was really fearful, and it's kind of like the fear I have of God, I guess. I never smoked. I never even tried it. Drinking, I never did. I tasted a beer one time, I think, and I don't like that. And even though I had it going all around me, I wasn't attracted to it because I knew my parents had raised me and had a different standard for me. And then it was more about my parents, I think, than it was really about God. And then as I got older, I realized that God had a standard for my life. And I realized in life I had been doing some things that if Jesus would have come and said, come up here, I would have been embarrassed. So I decided this in the last years, I needed to work more on what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and being prepared at any time to meet my God. and to take people with me, and not
Wow.
just live a life that is about all I can get and supporting my family, and all those things are important, but it's not the most important. We do God first, and He takes care of the rest.
When you got to Los Angeles, did you notice any difference in the values of LA versus the values of the place you grew up? Because you
Well, when
raised a
I got
family in
there,
LA, right? You raised a
yeah,
family in.
1960, I got out of the Air Force in well, no, 60. Yeah, well, I went to the Air Force. I wound up in the Air Force there in 1960, up in Victorville, and I moved down to Los Angeles. I stayed in Victorville after I got out, and then in 1972 moved down to Los Angeles. It was a total different environment, of course, than it is now.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah, it didn't have the thing about growing up on where I did. We didn't lock doors. You didn't have, yeah, your neighbors were quite a ways away, but you didn't. There wasn't the stress. There wasn't the concern. We didn't have the crime.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were kids drinking and crowding around, I guess, at school. I never really participated in that. Didn't really realize how much of it was going on. It was totally different. And then gradually, of course, in LA, even by the time my boys were in their teens, yeah, we had a whole lot more things, even with church kids, that we were dealing with because of all the environment of marijuana coming on and all these things. So yeah, it changed a lot.
Yeah. I bet. And it's even more different today, Phil.
Oh,
I
I,
mean,
I, yeah,
I'm not even an expert in LA, but I know enough where I worked there for a long time and just on the college campuses. I mean, the corruption you mentioned at the airports remind me of the college campuses. There's just so much that's wrong on the college campuses. I don't understand why people put up with it. I guess everybody
yeah,
feels like they need a college education, but then when you're not getting an education, what's the point? I just don't understand it, Phil. And we're paying
yeah.
for it with taxpayer money.
Well, that's right. And the thing we don't see when you look, what is behind all this? It's not just a few people that decide, oh, I'm going to try to sway people to my political belief. This is an agenda, and it's the same. It's been used in the past. Hitler used the same thing. You take the minds of the young people, and the only
Yeah.
way and it's been said by communists and others in past years, the only way we would take over America would be take their guns and take the minds of the young people and set them in a different tone. So when they come up, you realize what could happen in the next generation coming up with what we're coming out of our schools and with the mind bent that they have. And this is not just a small issue. And this is not just happening in America, it's happening all over the world. And there's an agenda that goes beyond. And it's not a conspiracy theory, it's
No.
a fact. And I've seen them and I've experienced them. But, and it's now more has happened in the last 2 years to take us down this road that I'd say happened in the last maybe 50 years. It's gone that far down so fast with this administration and what's happened when you look at all that's been done. So we'd better wake up.
It does feel like a spiritual darkness. And I feel like it's not a conspiracy theory because not because conspiracy theories are not true. Sometimes they are.
Right.
There are
Mm-hmm.
conspiracies, but you can't describe it merely in human terms. There seems to be something with a long attention span that feels it just feels spiritual to me. And people, they just feel like they have a low attention span. We don't see it. We don't pay attention. You can be trained to see it and to really pay attention. You can be trained, but that requires discipline. It almost requires that farm mentality of the farmer, like how you grew up. You have to think way ahead. It's not a short-term thinking thing. Farming is not a short-term thing. You're sowing the seeds, you're nurturing that thing. You got to deal with the weather, you got to deal with pestilence, disease, insects. Just read Laura Ingalls Wilder, all those books,
Yeah.
all the stuff
Yeah.
they dealt with. And uh, you know, I just don't see that kind of I don't see any thinking with the kids, and that's what
That's
bothers
right.
me. It's really disturbing to me.
That's right.
So,
That's
but
right.
you have hope, and I think that
That's
comes
right.
through in this interview. That you have some kind of, is it just the pills you take, or is it something you eat for breakfast? By the way, what time do you get up and what do you have for breakfast? Are you a morning person
Well, I used to be. I used to be up at 5 o'clock every morning. Just I don't know. I did that for
naturally?
years. Yeah, and I would do my studying early. I would because I spend time with the Word and studying and listening to the Lord. But now, yeah, sometimes maybe seven. um, but I don't eat big breakfasts unless it's go out or on a holiday or something. Maybe
Do you have
usually I have
coffee?
fruit. Yeah, coffee, fruit, and sometimes a croissant or something like that. More of a continental type. To have occasionally maybe on a Sunday, morning I might or after church come back I might fix a bacon and egg
Yeah.
breakfast, but
Okay.
not more. I mean I had cancer back in '92, colon cancer, and it kind of changed my life. Best thing that ever happened to me, and so I changed my diet to a lot more fruits, vegetables, and salads, and tried to eat healthier. Even though I still have red meat occasionally, but I'm healthy and great, and I try to eat healthy if I can.
So your hope for America. I mean, it seems like you're a hopeful person. What do you have? What's the basis of your hope?
Well, the basis of my hope is I know the end of the story, and I know where we're going to wind up. Number one, I know who's going to win the battle, and that's God. So in that time, I believe, and it will depend if we elect the right person in the next election, we could turn things around. And I believe God would give time. I believe we could push back on this curtain and of violence and evil and moral decay and transgenderism and sex stuff that is for the pit of hell. I believe we could push it. God is so patient. He is so loving and kind. It's amazing how he let his children in the past, when they would repent and come back to him, he would say, okay, you got more time. I've got plenty of time. His time is so different than us. So I believe if we do that, but it's going to take an uprising of people in the States to come back to say, we're willing to stand up and fight. Too many times, people that are in the church or people that have spiritual things, oh no, we're not supposed to be involved. The Bible, no, and it's what's so interesting. The leftists and all these people say, "Oh, the Constitution says separated church and state." It's not in the Constitution. Nowhere about separation of church and state. It's
Right.
something Jefferson said in a writing to people, and so they take all this stuff out of context. But we're falling for it. So if we wake up, the church, well, whole, not one total denomination, whatever they are, if they'll wake up and say, we're going to stand up and we're going to fight back. I had this real vivid experience recently. I was doing some preaching down in Mexico when I was down there. I was kind of pastoring an English speaking service at a Spanish church, and I was preparing for a message. And I just read Jeremiah 1:5, wasn't really thinking about it. And when it said, I knew you before you were in the womb.
Hmm.
I knew you. I gave you a name. I gave you a purpose before you were in the womb. And that hit me like I'd read that many times, and it just hit me. And I started weeping and I'm not necessarily a weeper, probably more emotional than I used to be. And I just looked up and it's like heaven opened. And I saw this figure of heaven. It's this vision or whatever you want to call it. And, and I looked and I saw angels with swords drawn saying, God, let us go save your babies. And I saw that head shake. And he said, no, it's not my time yet. I'm waiting for my church to rise up and push it back. I tell you,
Wow.
that affected me so dramatically. And I realized that God gives his people here work to do. And he gives us a lot of time to do it.
Hmm.
And if we won't, then ultimately he'll say, enough. I'm
Yeah.
coming. I'll take care of it.
Wow.
So I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful, but I'm also a realist, but whatever.
Yeah.
I know that I'm going to be taken care of. God's in control.
That's a great note to end on. I want to plug your book again. The book again is Hostile Intent. Protecting Yourself from Terrorism is the subtitle. And the author is that we've been speaking to is Phil Little. And he's the father of one of my former students, and that's how he got on my radar. And I appreciate, by the way, Phil, that when you gave me this book, when you came to Pepperdine to talk to my class, you inscribed it with a date. Thank you. And a little note and a nice signature. So it wasn't just your signature. So many authors, they just put their signature on it, but they don't put the date and they don't put a little note. And you said, Lucas, this is my search to find some answers about terrorism. I hope that you enjoy the read. Be safe, Phil Little. And I have to tell you, I did enjoy the book a lot. It's very well written and it hangs together nicely and you can read it. It's nice bedtime reading, actually. So that's what I've been doing. So thank you
Well, I
so
need to.
much.
I'll give a plug to Albert Pareto, who was he was
Yeah, I see that.
working for me, and he was a editor, and
Yeah.
he did a lot of editing on that, and it was really great to have that help in house.
Okay. Yeah, Albert Parada. Thank you very much for that. You're part in the book too. So thanks for coming on the podcast, Phil, to reconnect. I really enjoyed it.
I have too. In fact, I'm working on moving into a podcast. So people have been telling me to do it. And I thought I can't do that, but hey,
That's wonderful.
I'm moving there.
Well, you got
Yeah.
the right microphone and you got the earphones and all that stuff. And you've been on TV before, right? You've been on
Oh, I
TV lots.
yeah. I've done 100+ shows. I hosted a radio and television show in Los Angeles. Yeah.
That's right, you did. Okay, so it says you appear on NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox. I've heard of those.
Yeah.
And you were the host of Crime Line talk radio talk show in Los Angeles. How long did that go on
Right.
for?
For about 2 years. I had that about 2 years.
What station
Yeah.
was
It
that
was
on? Do you remember?
870. It was
Oh yeah, yeah.
oh
That's what
yeah.
Dennis Prager's on.
Yes. And it was great. It was my son was the engineer on it, which helped. But
Oh wow.
I was a novice to that, And but it was it was a call-in talk show, so we had people call in, and then I would have guests on. So it was fun. It was good. It was a good
You
learning.
have so much to bring to the podcast world. I really look forward to it. When you get that up and running, let me know and we'll
Right.
plug it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that because we got it started. So we'll let you know. Thank you. It was great seeing you again, and it was great being here. So, but thank you so much for the opportunity.
You bet.